Have you ever felt the reckless freedom of a rainy night, the kind that loosens your tongue and makes you confess secrets to a stranger you are certain you will never see again? For Amelia Moore, a moment of vulnerability in a dimly lit bar was supposed to be a fleeting release, a safe place to whisper the fantasies she kept hidden from her perfectly organized life. But fate has a wicked sense of humor, because the man listening in the shadows wasn't just a stranger. He was Lucas Wilson, a powerful figure capable of turning those whispered desires into a terrifying, exhilarating reality. Inspired by the real, passionate accounts shared by our amazing community, this story explores what happens when the wall between your secret self and your public life comes crashing down. Before we discover if Amelia can handle the heat she ignited, please take a moment to subscribe and like the video, and tell me in the comments where you are listening from tonight. Let's let the rain fall and the story begin. My life was a series of perfectly checked boxes. Wake up at 6, gym at 7, desk by 8:30. I was the reliable friend, the efficient assistant, the daughter who never missed a Sunday call. On the surface, Amelia Moore was a study in stability, but underneath the beige cardigans and sensible heels, I felt like I was slowly suffocating. It was a Friday night in November when the dam finally cracked. The Chicago wind was particularly cruel that evening, whipping rain against the glass of my office building as I watched my coworkers leave for happy hours I wasn't invited to, or perhaps simply never attended. I decided to walk, punishing myself for a week of silence, but the storm forced me into the lobby of the Drake Hotel. The bar was dim, smelling of old leather and expensive scotch, a sanctuary for the wealthy and the weary. I sat at the far end of the mahogany counter, dripping wet and shivering, feeling entirely out of place among the tailored suits and silk dresses. I ordered a bourbon, neat, shocking the bartender and, apparently, myself. The burn was grounding. It was my second glass that blurred the edges of my restraint. That was when I noticed him. He was sitting 2 stools away, a dark silhouette against the golden glow of the back bar. I couldn't see his face clearly, just the sharp line of a jaw and broad shoulders clad in charcoal wool. He radiated a kind of heavy silence that usually makes people nervous, but the alcohol made me bold. I didn't intend to speak. I certainly didn't intend to tell the truth. But when he shifted, the ice in his glass clinking softly, and asked without looking at me if the rain was ever going to stop, I didn't give a polite answer. I laughed, a low, bitter sound that felt foreign in my throat. I told him I hoped it wouldn't. I told him I wanted a storm that would wash away the boredom of being good. He turned then, and even in the shadows, his eyes were intense, dark, and unreadable. He didn't mock me, he just waited. And in that waiting silence, I unspooled. I told this stranger that I was tired of making decisions. I leaned in closer, the scent of sandalwood and rain wrapping around us, and whispered that my darkest fantasy wasn't about romance or flowers. It was about surrender. I told him I wanted someone to take the control I clung to so desperately and shatter it, to tell me exactly what to do and how to feel, leaving me with nothing but sensation. I confessed that I wanted to be used, beautifully and thoroughly, until I couldn't remember my own name. I expected him to recoil or laugh. Instead, he leaned in, his voice a low rumble that vibrated against my skin, and asked a single question that made my breath hitch. "And what would you give to have that, Amelia?" I froze, my heart hammering against my ribs because I had never told him my name. The sound of my own name on his lips was like a bucket of ice water, instantly sobering and terrifying. I scrambled back, the leather stool screeching against the floor, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I stared at him, searching for a sign of recognition, a memory of a meeting I had forgotten, but his face remained a mask of calm amusement. He didn't move to stop me. He simply tapped a long finger against the polished wood of the bar, gesturing toward my purse. Spilling out of the side pocket was my corporate lanyard, the plastic ID card catching the dim light, displaying my name in bold, black letters. The realization that I wasn't being stalked, but merely observed by someone paying far more attention than I was, flushed my cheeks with a heat that had nothing to do with the bourbon. I didn't say another word. I couldn't. The shame of what I had just confessed, the raw, unfiltered desire to be possessed, clashed violently with the reality of my exposure. I grabbed my bag, threw a $20 bill onto the counter, and turned on my heel, fleeing into the biting Chicago wind. I expected footsteps behind me, a hand on my arm, but the only sound was the traffic on Michigan Avenue and the pounding of my own blood in my ears. He let me go. That fact alone was more unsettling than if he had chased me. It implied a confidence that didn't need to run. For the next 4 weeks, I lived in a state of heightened, nervous exhaustion. Every time the elevator doors opened at work, I held my breath. Every time a shadow fell across my desk, I flinched. But he never appeared. The man from the bar became a ghost, a figment of a rainy Friday night that I tried desperately to convince myself I had imagined, yet my body remembered. In the quiet moments before sleep, the memory of his low voice vibrating in the air would return, causing a heavy, aching pulse low in my stomach that no amount of rationalizing could extinguish. My routine returned to its gray monotony, but the colors seemed duller now, the silence of my apartment louder. I threw myself into spreadsheets and scheduling, trying to bury the humiliation under layers of efficiency. It was my best friend Chloe who finally dragged me out of my self-imposed exile. She cornered me in the break room with 2 coffees and a look of determination that I knew better than to argue with. Her father's annual charity gala was that weekend, a black tie affair at their estate in Lake Forest that usually consisted of stiff conversations and lukewarm champagne. I tried to decline, citing a headache, a workload, anything, but Chloe wasn't having it. She insisted she needed moral support because her father had brought on a new managing partner, someone notoriously difficult and private, who was demanding a complete restructuring of the event. She described him as a tyrant in a tailored suit, but I barely listened to the details, my mind drifting back to the sensation of being watched in the dark. Eventually, worn down and desperate for a distraction from my own haunted thoughts, I agreed. I told myself it was just a party, just one night to play dress-up and pretend my life wasn't unraveling from the inside out. I had no idea that walking into that ballroom wouldn't be an escape, but a collision course with the very storm I had been running from. The drive to Lake Forest felt like crossing into a different world, leaving the gritty reality of the city behind for winding driveways and wrought iron gates guarded by ancient oaks. Snow had started to fall, dusting the windshield in hypnotic patterns, but inside the car, the air was thick with Chloe's nervous energy. She kept adjusting her silk shawl, rambling about her father's new business partner, a man she described as brilliant but utterly terrifying, someone who had reorganized the entire company structure in under a month without raising his voice. I nodded along, offering vague reassurances, but my mind was elsewhere, still snagged on the memory of whiskey and rain. I felt like an imposter in my velvet gown, a deep midnight blue that hugged my curves in a way I usually avoided, but tonight I needed the armor. When we finally stepped into the foyer of the estate, the sheer scale of the wealth was overwhelming. Crystal chandeliers cast a prism of light over a sea of tuxedos and designer gowns, the air heavy with the scent of expensive lilies and old money. I stuck close to Chloe, using her presence as a shield against the room, hoping to blend into the wallpaper until the night was over. We were near the champagne tower when a hush rippled through the crowd, starting at the grand staircase and spreading outward like a wave. Chloe squeezed my arm, her nails digging into my skin through the velvet, and whispered that he was here. I followed her gaze, expecting an older, severe man, perhaps graying and stern. Instead, my breath trapped in my throat, turning into a painful, silent gasp. Standing at the top of the stairs, looking down at the crowd with that same terrifying, bored composure I remembered from the bar, was him, the stranger, Lucas Wilson. He looked different in a tuxedo, the sharp tailoring emphasizing the breadth of his shoulders and the dangerous elegance of his posture, but the eyes were unmistakably the same, dark, intelligent, and currently scanning the room with the precision of a predator looking for a specific scent. Panic, cold and sharp, flooded my system. I instinctively took a step back, intending to disappear into the throng, to run to the bathroom, to call an Uber, to flee the country. But it was too late. His gaze stopped moving. He locked onto me across the expanse of the ballroom, and for a second, the noise of the party faded into a dull roar. There was no surprise on his face, only a slow, deliberate acknowledgement that sent a shiver racing down my spine. He didn't smile. He just held my gaze for a heartbeat longer than was socially acceptable before descending the stairs. I wanted to grab Chloe and leave, but she was already pulling me forward, eager to make introductions and get the ordeal over with. I was trapped. As he approached, the crowd seemed to part for him effortlessly. When he finally stopped in front of us, looming tall and smelling of that same crisp sandalwood and winter air, my knees felt dangerously weak. Chloe launched into a breathless introduction, praising his arrival, but he barely looked at her. He turned his attention entirely to me, extending a hand that looked large and capable. I had no choice but to take it. His skin was warm, his grip firm and possessive, and as his fingers closed around mine, sending a jolt of electricity straight up my arm, he spoke in that low, familiar rumble that had haunted my dreams for weeks. "Amelia," he said, skipping the formalities entirely, his thumb brushing the sensitive skin of my wrist in a secret, deliberate caress that no one else could see. "I was beginning to worry you wouldn't show up. My heart was beating so hard against my ribs, I was certain the entire room could see the fabric of my gown trembling." Chloe looked between us, her eyebrows knitting together in confusion, her gaze darting from Lucas's proprietary grip on my hand to my pale, stricken face. She asked the question I was dreading, her voice pitched high with surprise, demanding to know how on earth her best friend knew the elusive Lucas Wilson. I opened my mouth to stammer out a lie, something about a business conference or a mistaken identity, but my throat was parched, the words turning to dust before they could reach my tongue. Lucas didn't miss a beat. He answered for me, his voice smooth like velvet over gravel, telling her that we had met briefly at the Drake a few weeks ago and that I had left a rather lasting impression. The double meaning hung heavy in the air between us, invisible to Chloe but suffocating to me. He finally released my hand, but the ghost of his touch lingered, burning my skin. Before I could navigate the minefield of this conversation, Chloe's father appeared, waving her over for a photo with the board members. She gave me an apologetic squeeze and a whispered promise to rescue me in 5 minutes, leaving me alone in the lion's den. I considered bolting again. The exit sign was glowing a tempting green above the double doors to the left, but as I shifted my weight to turn, Lucas stepped into my space. He didn't touch me, but he was close enough that I could smell the crisp scent of snow and expensive scotch clinging to him, blocking my escape with nothing but his presence. He asked quietly why I ran that night. I tried to summon the professional persona I wore like armor at the office, straightening my spine and clutching my clutch until my knuckles turned white. I told him it was a mistake, that I had been drinking and speaking nonsense, and that I would appreciate it if he forgot the entire humiliating encounter ever happened. I expected him to mock me, or perhaps to accept my dismissal and walk away. Instead, he took a step closer, lowering his head so his mouth was dangerously near my ear, shielding his words from the curious eyes of the gala. He murmured that he didn't believe in mistakes, only in revealed truths. He told me that he had spent the last month thinking about every detail I had whispered in that bar, analyzing the specific dark shape of my desires. The way he spoke wasn't lewd. It was clinical, intense, and terrifyingly focused. He admitted that my confession hadn't just been interesting, it had been a challenge. I felt a flush creeping up my neck, a mixture of shame and a traitorous, sparking heat. I whispered furiously that he didn't know me, that the woman in the bar wasn't real. Lucas pulled back just enough to look me in the eye, his gaze stripping away my defenses. He said he suspected the woman in the bar was the only real version of me, and the polite, terrified creature standing before him in a navy gown was the lie. The tension between us was a physical weight, a taut wire that threatened to snap. He reached out, his fingers hovering near my elbow, not quite making contact, and dropped the bomb that shattered my composure completely. He said he didn't just want to talk about the weather. He wanted to know if I was brave enough to let him prove that what I asked for in the dark could survive the light of day. Before I could stammer out a denial or a defense, the spell was broken by the sharp click of heels on marble. Chloe bounced back to our side, breathless and oblivious, apologizing for the delay and complaining about her father's insistence on introducing her to a senator. The transition in Lucas was instantaneous and terrifyingly seamless. The predator who had just cornered me evaporated, replaced by the polite, charismatic business partner. He charmed Chloe with a compliment about the event's organization, his voice smooth and devoid of the dark undertone he had used on me just seconds before. Watching him navigate the social pleasantries with such effortless deception made my stomach turn, not with revulsion, but with a dizzying mix of awe and fear. If he could wear a mask this perfect, how much of what I saw in the bar was real? I tried to excuse myself, muttering something about needing fresh air, but Lucas moved before I could take a step. He didn't grab me. He simply extended his hand as the orchestra swelled into a slow, melancholy waltz. He asked if I would do him the honor of a dance, phrasing it as a polite request, but his eyes held a challenge that dared me to cause a scene by refusing. Chloe, delighted by the prospect of her friend mingling with the guest of honor, practically shoved me forward. I placed my hand in his, and the contact was electric, a sudden jolt of warmth that traveled straight to my core. He led me to the dance floor with a confidence that bordered on arrogance, pulling me into his frame. His hand settled on the small of my back, burning through the velvet of my dress, his grip firm and possessive. We moved in silence for a moment, the world around us blurring into a kaleidoscope of light and color, leaving only the scent of sandalwood and the heat of his body against mine. I tried to keep a respectable distance, but he guided me closer, his movements fluid and commanding. He murmured against my hair that I was trembling. I denied it, lifting my chin to meet his gaze, trying to salvage some shred of my dignity. He didn't mock me this time. Instead, his expression softened into something dangerously intense. He told me that he wasn't playing a game, Amelia. He admitted that since that night at the Drake, the control he prided himself on had been slipping. He told me he wanted to make an arrangement, one that would explore everything I had whispered to him in the dark, but on terms that would ensure my safety and his sanity. It wasn't a demand, it was an offer, laid out with the precision of a contract but delivered with the intimacy of a lover. My breath hitched as his thumb brushed the sensitive skin of my waist, sending a shiver through me that I couldn't hide. The music began to fade, and he leaned in, his lips grazing the shell of my ear, his voice dropping to a rough whisper that made my knees weak. He told me to stop running, to stop pretending that this, the heat, the tension, the inevitable pull, wasn't exactly what I had asked for. As the song ended and he stepped back, creating a cold void where his body had been, he slipped a heavy, cream-colored card into my palm, closing my fingers over it. He didn't say goodbye. He just gave me a look that promised this was far from over and walked away, leaving me standing alone in the middle of the crowded ballroom, clutching his private number like a lifeline or a grenade. The heavy cream card in my hand felt less like a piece of stationery and more like a burning coal, branding my palm with a promise I wasn't sure I could keep. The air in the ballroom had become stifling, thick with perfume and the drone of polite conversation that suddenly felt incredibly trivial. I needed to breathe. I slipped through the French doors onto the terrace, the biting chill of the Chicago winter hitting my flushed skin like a physical slap. The snow was falling harder now, muffling the sounds of the city, creating a cocoon of silence that felt both protective and isolating. I walked to the stone railing, gripping the cold surface, trying to steady the tremors in my hands. I told myself to tear the card up, to let the wind carry the pieces into the dark garden below, but my fingers refused to obey. I was so lost in the internal war between my common sense and my curiosity that I didn't hear the door open behind me. I only knew he was there because the air suddenly felt charged, heavy with a presence that made the hair on the back of my arms stand up. Lucas didn't announce himself. He simply moved to stand beside me, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from his tuxedo, blocking the wind. He placed his hands on the railing, mirroring my posture, looking out into the dark expanse of the grounds. He asked quietly if I was going to throw it away. His voice was calm, devoid of the mockery I feared, filled instead with a terrifying certainty. I turned to look at him, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I admitted, my voice barely a whisper, that I should. He turned then, his dark eyes locking onto mine, stripping away the layers of defense I had carefully constructed over years of playing it safe. He told me that should was a word for people who were afraid to live, Amelia. He stepped closer, invading my personal space until his chest brushed the front of my gown, and the scent of him, scotch, snow, and expensive cologne, filled my senses. He reached up, his thumb tracing the line of my jaw, tilting my face up to his. The contact was electric, scorching, and tender all at once. He whispered that he saw the way I looked at him inside, that he knew the woman from the bar was still in there, waiting to be let out. I wanted to deny it, to push him away and run back to the safety of Chloe and the champagne, but my body betrayed me. I leaned into his touch. That small surrender was all the invitation he needed. Lucas lowered his head and kissed me. It wasn't a tentative, polite kiss, it was a claiming. His mouth was hot and demanding, tasting of whiskey and danger, sweeping away every logical thought I had left. I gasped, my hands clutching the lapels of his jacket, pulling him closer as the world tilted on its axis. For a moment, there was nothing but the friction of his lips, the strength of his arms wrapping around my waist, and the terrifying realization that I had never felt anything this real in my entire life. He pulled back just as abruptly as he had started, leaving my lips swollen and my breath coming in ragged gasps. He didn't say a word. He just ran his thumb over my bottom lip one last time, his eyes dark with a promise that terrified and thrilled me, then turned and walked back into the party, leaving me alone in the snow with his card burning a hole in my hand and the absolute certainty that I was going to make that call. This marks the end of part 1 of our story. The consequences of that kiss and the dangerous arrangement that follows will unfold in the next video. Please, if you enjoyed this start, take a moment to rate this story from 1 to 10 in the comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss part 2. Thank you for listening.